HARTAIXX2016 provided the incentive for the organization of the Great Exhibition held in London a couple of years later. Indeed, Great Britain was at the time the most advanced country technologically, but also in economic terms. So how could it be that England had not organized an exhibition of this type? The idea was actually taken by a small group of people belonging to the Royal Society of Arts, a company that had been created in the 18th century and had been revitalized by the presence of Prince Albert, who had become president of the society. Here we have a painting depicting the main protagonist of the organization of the 1851 exhibition. In the center, we have actually Prince Albert sitting, and the people pointing a finger towards the paper in front of the prince is actually Joseph Paxton, of whom a bit later. So the society, it's in the middle of this society that this idea to organize something at a much larger scale than what had been done before gradually emerged. So first, one had to find a land where to hold the exhibition, and Prince Albert actually secured the temporary loan of part of Hyde Park as the place where the exhibition could take place. Other members of the society were extremely active, securing promises of artifacts to be displayed. The secretary of the society toured the United Kingdom, visiting industrialists in order to obtain those promises. What was gradually emerging was a very large project. Overall, the estimation was that something like 800,000 square feet would be necessary to host the entire exhibition. Hence, the idea to call for proposal for a very large building in order to be able to shelter all the artifact that would be displayed. A committee was formed and asked for proposals to architects all over Europe. The call was issued in March 1850, and a couple of months later, some 230 proposals were received, most of them from the United Kingdom and France. Two proposals were especially noticed. The first one by a French architect, Hector Aurot, a kind of gigantic shed, very much like a railway station. The second one from Richard Turner, an engineer who had recently realized the Kew Garden greenhouse. Both proposals were admired for their qualities. They were both actually proposing a single building, something that would be retained by the committee. In the case of Aurot, this inspiration would later lead him to his utopian project for covering the Grand Boulevard in Paris with iron sheds. We can see there the genealogy between the world of the Passage, the Great Exhibition, and subsequent development in an urban iron construction proposal. Some 230 proposals for the Great Exhibition buildings were exhibited in London in the Institute of Civil Engineers in June 1850. From those proposals, especially from the two most noticed ones, the Hector Aurot and the Richard Turner ones, the committee drew a number of conclusions. The first one was that instead of conceiving a series of separate buildings, it was probably much better to imagine a single building, which would give more flexibility, a flexibility all the more needed that the definitive organization of the exhibition was not yet known, especially since all the loans had not yet been secured. Another idea related to this single building choice was to conceive it in a modular way. And this is where the idea of a module of 24 feet began to emerge as probably the most convenient choice. The committee had a number of architects and engineers, and since no proposal had been deemed completely satisfactory, the architects and engineers of the committee decided to design their own proposal following, these general choices: single building, a grid on a 24 feet module. What the result was actually a pretty horrendous proposal made of brick with a giant dome that would have dwarfed the St. Peter's one, but which proved not only ugly in the eye of the public, but also highly problematic since it entailed a massive production of bricks that would have then to be demolished. At this stage, the organizers began to doubt that they would ever be able to organize the exhibition. Not only seemed the scheme completely unpractical, but the money to build it seemed difficult to secure. The public, in addition, was growing more and more skeptical about the idea because of the images that had been shown in the press, such as this one. Prince Albert itself was beginning to despair. This is where Joseph Paxton comes into play as, in some ways the savior, a kind of superhero like Superman who's going to really redeem the situation and transform what was a path towards failure in one of the greatest achievements of the early 1850s.